Hey guys, tonight we trudge quietly into a world where justice was a public performance, and punishments were as creative as they were cruel. You probably won't survive the imagination of some of these medieval spectacles, but that's okay. You're here for the story, not the experience. Imagine stepping onto a cobblestone square at dawn, fog curling around timber-bird houses, and the townsfolk gathering with glee to witness what passes for law. The air smells of damp straw, wood smoke, and a faint tang of vinegar from the morning market, and you can almost hear the nervous shuffle of someone about to meet the pillory. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see how far this story stretches across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge closer to the square, noticing how punishment was as much about performance as law. Villagers lean on fences, children balance on fence posts, and a dog barks at someone who probably said the wrong thing at last week's tavern. Public shaming was a currency, a warning, a spectacle, and historians still argue whether these events were more effective as deterrents or just as entertainment. You can feel the collective tension, a mixture of fear and amusement, as the accused is brought forward. Imagine your heart thumping while the executioner adjusts ropes, the crowd murmuring, and someone tosses an apple to a friend in the front row, because even in punishment, life finds its quirks. And there is a sensory layer most modern accounts forget. The heat of the morning sun baking your shoulders, the rough touch of straw under your feet, and the chill of a breeze that carries distant laughter and gossip. Punishments were designed to leave impressions, sometimes physical, often psychological. You might even catch a whiff of an errant pigeon, someone's forgotten mess, landing just behind the scaffold, an accidental reminder that life, even in darkness, had moments of absurd comedy. In these early steps, you realize that medieval justice wasn't just about rules. It was theater, ritual, and community judgment all rolled into one. Imagine being the spectator, watching your neighbor endure humiliation, noting every twitch, every stumble, and perhaps secretly feeling relief that it isn't you yet. The fear mingles with fascination. You probably won't survive if the Iron Maiden comes next, but tonight we're only warming up. Remember the fog, the smell, the small, human details. They'll color the more extreme punishments waiting ahead. You trudge closer to the pillory, that infamous wooden contraption with holes for head and hands, and feel a strange mix of dread and curiosity. It's not just a punishment. It's a stage. You imagine the blacksmith's handiwork, polished and splintered, each notch and hinge meticulously designed to humiliate. Villagers circle around, some carrying rotten vegetables like tickets to a carnival, while others whisper bets on how long the offender will last without fainting. You probably won't survive the embarrassment if it were you, wedged stiffly between boards, neck aching, arms pinned, and every passerby free to jab insults or pelt fruit. Historians still argue whether the pillory's public aspect was meant more for rehabilitation or pure spectacle. And frankly, the line blurs when you see a town as mayor tossing a carrot at someone as head just for fun. The texture of the pillory's wood is rough against your palms, the same way it would have cut the skin of anyone forced into it for even minor offenses, petty theft, gossip, or failing to pay a fine. You can feel the unforgiving hardness through imagined touch, and the air is thick with tension, laughter, and you trudge toward the Iron Maiden, a name that conjures a cold shiver even before you glimpse the spikes inside. Standing in the dim light of a medieval dungeon, or, let's be honest, probably a slightly damp, stone corridor, you feel the air thicken with anticipation. The Iron Maiden is legendary. A tall, coffin-shaped device lined with spikes that would impale anyone foolish enough to enter. Or, so the stories go. Historians still argue whether the Iron Maiden was ever truly used in medieval Germany, or if it was a later invention meant to terrify tourists and thrill storytellers. Either way, the image is seared into your imagination. Iron closing in, spikes aligned with morbid precision, and the faint metallic scent of rust and fear. You probably won't survive just picturing yourself trapped inside, but that's exactly why we lean in closer. The outside of the Iron Maiden is deceptively mundane, almost like an ordinary cabinet. You can run your fingers along the smooth, cold metal, tracing rivets and seams, wondering how someone designed such a device without modern engineering. Inside, the spikes are pointed, yet strangely placed, not always deadly, sometimes more about discomfort, humiliation, and psychological terror than outright murder. Fringe tailies claim that some versions were padded so the spikes wouldn't pierce flesh, but would prod painfully, almost like a medieval acupuncture gone horribly wrong. Historians debate these accounts, wondering if such padding existed, or if it is a fanciful detail added by 19th century writers trying to make torture even more terrifying. As you peer into the coffin-shaped interior, your imagination fills in the sounds, the creak of iron hinges, the faint groan of the imprisoned body shifting, and the echoing footsteps of curious onlookers outside. You can almost feel the chill of the metal pressing against skin, the strange smell of sweat and fear, and the odd contrast of silence, punctuated by whispers and occasional laughter. A quirky tidbit: some sources claim that the Iron Maiden was sometimes decorated with reliefs or painted faces on the outside, perhaps to mock the victim or entertain the spectators. Can you imagine being mocked by a smiling iron face while stuck in what could easily be mistaken for a haunted wardrobe? And then there's the human psychology layered over this metallic nightmare. Some prisoners reportedly fainted from the terror alone, never reaching the supposed spikes. Others screamed, cried, or, in rare cases, laughed at the absurdity of being confined in a piece of furniture that looks more like a quirky cabinet than a deadly device. The Iron Maiden reminds you that medieval punishments were often about storytelling. The fear, the legend, and the communal thrill sometimes mattered more than the actual pain inflicted. Stepping back, you shiver at the thought of confinement and horror, but there is also a strange fascination, an irresistible pull to imagine the theater of fear that surrounded such devices. You probably won't survive the whipping post next, but for now, you're safely outside the Iron Maiden, marveling at how myth and history intertwine so seamlessly that even centuries later, the stories make your skin crawl. You trudge toward the whipping post, feeling the rough-hewn wood beneath your fingers as you imagine the countless backs that have slammed against it. The post stands in the middle of the square, sun casting long shadows across the cobblestones, and a scent of sweat. You trudge toward the ducking stool, that infamous device reserved mostly for scolds, nags, and women accused of disturbing the peace, and the air grows damp with anticipation. The wooden frame, simple yet ingeniously cruel, hangs over a river or pond, ready to deliver a swift dunk to anyone deemed socially intolerable. You probably won't survive imagining yourself strapped into that seat, feet dangling above murky water while the townsfolk lean in, giggling and betting on how many times you'll resurface coughing and sputtering. Historians still argue whether the ducking stool was truly as common as records suggest, or if its notoriety comes from a handful of sensational cases, amplified by pamphlets and chroniclers. Either way, the concept itself is enough to make your fingers tense, imagining the chill of water seeping into your bones while your dignity floats downstream. As you step closer, you notice the construction. A simple wooden chair attached to a long beam, sometimes with counterweights, sometimes operated by several strong townsmen. The operator swings the chair out over the water and lowers it slowly, or perhaps a little too, enthusiastically creating a predictable symphony of splashes, coughs, and shouts. Fringe accounts claim that some towns turned the dunking into an almost carnival-like spectacle, with children waving sticks like audience props, and villagers keeping score of who resurfaced fastest. You shiver, realizing that punishment had an element of interactive entertainment, sometimes uncomfortable for the victim, often hilarious for the crowd. And there is a sensory layer that makes this scene oddly vivid. The smell of wet straw on the nearby banks, the faint tang of river water, and the quiver of wooden beams under strain. You can almost feel the chair wobbling beneath you, the water lapping against your boots, or against your imagination, at least. Oddly enough, some versions of the ducking stool included a mask or a yoke to further humiliate the victim, making them not just wet, but also the literal face of scorn. Historians still debate how frequently these additional elements were used, or if they were just colorful exaggerations preserved by storytelling. As the chair dips, you hear the crowd react, gasping, cheering, teasing, and you catch yourself smiling at the absurdity, the blend of cruelty and entertainment. You probably won't survive the next device, the scold's bridle, but for now you linger on the edge, picturing the watery punishment in slow motion, the squeak of the wooden hinges, the splash, and the startled cry that echoes across the village square. You trudge toward the scold's bridle, a grotesque metal contraption designed to silence women accused of nagging, gossiping, or otherwise disturbing their households. The mask, often studded with spikes or projecting a metal tongue, clamps over the head and presses down on the mouth, leaving the victim humiliated and helpless. You probably won't survive imagining it strapped to your face, the iron biting into cheeks, jaw locked tight, and the town's judgmental gaze boring into your skin. Historians still argue whether the scold's bridle was as widely used as records suggest, or whether surviving examples are merely relics that exaggerated a rare punishment into a legend. Either way, the very idea of being muzzled in public is enough to make your teeth clench in empathy or in nervous laughter at the absurdity of human cruelty. The bridle's design varies from simple iron frameworks to elaborate masks with spikes and bells. You trudge toward the stocks, those low wooden frames that trap feet and sometimes hands, or even heads in unyielding timber, and immediately sense the strange duality of this punishment. Simple in design, complex in experience. Imagine your ankles locked in place, calves pressed against the rough wood, toes scraping the dirt, and the townsfolk circling like spectators at a bizarre sporting event. You probably won't survive picturing the aching muscles and the creeping numbness as hours stretch endlessly. Yet that's exactly the point. The discomfort was as much psychological as physical. Historians still argue whether stocks were meant primarily as deterrence or as communal amusements disguised as punishment. And standing there, it's easy to see both purposes. Sometimes local creativity amplified the misery. Fringe reports tell of devices that pressed feet against sharp metal ridges or incorporated adjustable screws to increase tension, essentially turning a simple restraint into a makeshift medieval torture bench. You could almost feel the crushing pressure building slowly, toes tingling painfully, calves burning, and the faint scrape of rope against skin. Oddly, some towns allowed curious passers-by to poke, prod, or even mildly torment those trapped, blending punishment with audience participation in a way that modern sensibilities would find shocking. Yet in that mix, humor and absurdity peek through. Someone might dangle a carrot in front of the prisoner, or place a straw hat crookily on their head, while giggling children pretend it as a fashion statement. The sensory experience is vivid. The sun beating down on your immobilized legs, the scent of unwashed clothes, and the nearby marketplace, the rhythmic tapping of a boot on cobblestones as someone paces impatiently. Occasionally, animals join in, pigeons hopping across wooden beams, dogs sniffing with curiosity, even the stray goat that wandered in last week. Historians debate whether these stock variations were standard or inventive outliers. But either way, they underscore a larger truth. Medieval punishments often combined physical constraint with theatricality, and sometimes inadvertent comedy. And beyond the legs, The imagination stretches to contraptions that press the arms or head in awkward angles, designed to amplify suffering. You probably won't survive the next section, boiling and branding, but for now, linger with the odd, almost absurd ingenuity of these devices, the mix of pain, shame, and spectacle that defines a world where social order was enforced not just with laws, but with imagination. You trudge toward the heat of medieval justice, where boiling water, oil, or molten metal waited to educate or terrify those who stepped out of line. Imagine the hiss and steam rising from enormous cauldrons, the metallic tang of heated iron or oil blending with the scent of charred wood and sweat. You probably won't survive picturing the sheer panic of someone dangling over such a vessel. Yet the spectacle was as much psychological theater as it was punishment. Historians still argue whether these extreme methods were truly as common as chronicles suggest, or whether later storytellers exaggerated their prevalence to entertain and frighten. Regardless, the idea alone sends a shiver down your spine, a vivid reminder that medieval law could be both inventive and ruthless. The process varied wildly. Some punishments involved dipping offenders briefly in scalding water. You trudge toward one of the most notorious rituals of medieval England, being hanged, drawn, and quartered. The phrase alone sends a shiver down your spine, and you probably won't survive picturing it in full detail, but that's the allure, isn't it? The accused would be led to a scaffold, ropes coiled and ready, with a crowd gathering to witness a performance of extreme symbolism. Historians still argue whether all the steps were always executed as described, or if some accounts were exaggerated for dramatic effect. Yet the ritual's reputation alone ensured its fearsome power. Imagine the tension in the air, a mixture of morbid curiosity, moral righteousness, and collective adrenaline buzzing through the townsfolk. The ceremony was intricate. First came the hanging, not necessarily to kill immediately, but to suspend and shock. Then the drawing. The body was disemboweled, limbs sometimes tied to horses and dragged, a grisly spectacle designed to illustrate the consequences of treason or severe crime. Fringe accounts tell of executioners who developed almost choreographed techniques, performing each step with precise timing to heighten both drama and audience impact. You can almost hear the collective gasp, the faint shuffle of feet, and the murmured prayers or curses whispered through the crowd. Oddly enough, some chroniclers report that animals, like stray dogs or birds, sometimes circled curiously, indifferent to the human ritual, adding an almost absurdly natural counterpoint to the orchestrated horror. There's also a sensory element, a sharp tang of iron from chains, the thick smoke of nearby torches, and the rough texture of ropes and wooden platforms under your fingers. You might sense the rhythmic stamping of anxious townsfolk or the muffled sobs of those close enough to feel empathy. Historians debate whether the public's horror was part of the intended lesson or simply an unintended side effect, but either way, the impact was undeniable. The ritual blended fear, spectacle, and social control into a single unforgettable tableau. In a twist of grim humor, some sources claim that a few convicted individuals tried to perform last-minute theatrics, gesturing to the crowd, shouting accusations at onlookers, or winking to friends, reminding use that even in the darkest rituals, human personality found a way to assert itself. You probably won't survive the next section, the breaking wheel, but for now, linger with the macabre choreography of hanged, drawn, and quartered, imagining the crowd, the platform, and the chilling effectiveness of medieval theater in enforcing obedience and awe. You trudge toward the breaking wheel, an instrument designed to snap bones in a slow, calculated display of pain and spectacle. Picture a large wooden wheel laid flat or upright, with the condemned tied across its spokes, while executioners methodically crush limbs with a heavy iron cudgel. You probably won't survive imagining the intricate choreography of suffering, yet that's precisely what made it a public event, the combination of horror, anticipation, and oddly enough, communal fascination. Historians still argue whether the wheel was intended primarily as a tool of justice or as a performative lesson in obedience. And the line is blurred when you consider the spectators cheering on each carefully placed